The Mob and the Mass, a precursor to the essay Belonging Again, on differences between collectives forming to destroy givens and collectives forming because of givens. Perhaps all collectives end similar in consequence, but they are not identical in origin. The French Revolution and Nazism both entailed groups and crowds. But while the French Revolution deconstructed societal norms, Nazism became a societal norm and was incubated by norms. Classically, there have been efforts to associate Western Liberalism with Stalin and conservatism with Hitler, but I cannot say I find this distinction helpful. For me, it is much more productive to consider the difference between the mob, which destroys givens, and the mass, which results because of givens. This captures the tragedy of us. Now, we could argue that Nazism started as a mob and became a mass, so I don't mean to say the categories are rigid and cannot overlap, but at the same time, I think it is very important to recognize that we cannot escape collectivist dangers by either becoming entirely liberal or entirely conservative, as we cannot liberate individuals from collective dangers through deconstructing givens or maintaining givens. We are always at risk, no exit. Considering Nietzsche, we could associate Dionysus with the mob, the French Revolution, while Apollo gives us the mass, Nazi Germany. The mob is when we rebel against the oppressive social order for the sake of individual authenticity, desire, and so on, while the mass is created when we follow the social order thoughtlessly, which is the banality of evil, easily against those very rebels supposedly defending individual authenticity, desire, morality, and so on, when really we know the rebels are destroying these values. The mass and the mob are opposites in a way, and yet they are also identical in being collectives and possibly totalitarian. It is impossible for me to imagine Nietzsche's philosophy generating the banality of evil, and so it is impossible for me to imagine Nietzsche supporting Nazi Germany, even if Nietzsche might ironically motivate a French Revolution which brought about a Nazi Germany to stabilize. This brings to mind The Iconoclast by Samuel Barnes, and we could associate the iconoclast with the one who brings about the mob, while the dogmatist brings about the mass. Which is more dangerous? Mobs and masses have killed millions and made millions miserable. We must avoid both. But how might we accomplish this goal? Indeed, that is the question. How Freud unites Inception, Hannah Arendt, and QAnon by O.G. Rose explored how the feeling of being in a movie and being in a dream overlap when we are in a group, a psychological experience that's potential is found in everyone. It is part of our very real, our pathos now, to allude to Lacan, versus something emergent which isn't in us at all times. This makes us innately primed to join a mob if we are not careful, but it is also the case that the natural desire of our brains to save energy primes us to engage in the thoughtlessness that makes us part of a mass. Between mass and mob, we must tread, and the rod on which we balance is made of glass, invisible. Edmund Burke in mind, we could say that the mob is a sublime release, a manifestation of the pleasure principle, unrestricted by the reality principle, while the mass is a moralization of beauty, symmetry, and harmony at the expense of people. The mob is goodness without beauty, while the mass is beauty without goodness. Both create their own truths, but lacking the three infinities all at once, neither ends up with any truth that's greater than notion. Worse yet, both end up in terror. Though the experiment has been criticized recently, it is still interesting to see the Stanford prison experiment as something that resembles a movie and dream, which creates a feeling of distance from reality, which facilitates bad behavior. The guards had roles like actors, and the group of the guards was posed against the group of the prisoners, suggesting a possible mixture of group psychology with scapegoating. To those in the experiment, it easily felt like a dream or something people could get lost in. And certainly everyone found themselves acting a role which they ceased being able to dissociate themselves with. As in dreams, we find ourselves in roles we can't imagine we're not actually. The feeling of being in a dream or movie seems to define a feeling of the mob. But aren't the guards in the experiment more thoughtless? Doesn't that define a mass? Indeed, the overlap is real. And when we live according to Givens, we take on roles and parts which support the nation and our community for good and for bad. But it is precisely this overlap that suggests why neither mass nor mob is the answer to our social troubles, even if at times one of them seems like it will. So be. Ultimately, mobs become masses, and masses are thoughtless. And yet there are times when we need to deconstruct Givens, risking the mob, as there are times when we need Givens, risking the mass. What must we do? As further evidence that mobs and masses can bleed into one another ultimately. What does Strauss have to do with Ardent? By O.G. Rose attempted to argue that we can understand what Strauss describes not as opposite to Ardent, but as a desire to return to the very Givens, which calls the banality of evil. German nihilism leads to Ardent, we could say, and in this Arendt, and we could say, and we can see how a mob can lead to a mass in the same way that a mob, like what arose in the French Revolution, occurred precisely to stop the corruptions and oppressions of the mass. The mob and the mass are always entangled in fighting, like two coiled vipers. G.K. Chesterson's quote comes to mind: "Marriage is a duel to the death, which no man of honor should decline, seeing as society is a relationship." The mass results from oppressive norms or sanity even, while the mob results from opposing sanity and norms. The mass is what Foucault and Arendt warned about. The mob is what Burke and Tocqueville lamented, though both can lead into the other. All right. But if mobs and masses can converge, why do we need the distinction? Because the starting conditions are different. And if we are not aware of that, we might think we are avoiding the outcomes of the mass by starting with the conditions which arise to the mob, as we might think we are avoiding the outcomes of the mob by starting with the conditions which arise to the mass. We think we're safe. We can think we're safe when danger lurks large. We need both Strauss and Arendt to understand the paradox of our human condition and how we are all prone to incredibly consequential irony. Our efforts to stop the mob with the mass can be precisely what causes a mob in response, as our efforts to oppose the mass with the mob can precisely be what brings about a new mass that is easily worse than what came before. We cannot save ourselves through the mob or the mass, but why exactly? And the implications of this impossibility are what Belonging Again, the essay, will explore. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, so on and so forth. For a copy of Belonging Again, please see Amazon. All purchases and reviews are greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for your time.